topic specifically, we could probably change the outcome of how these people turn out because of the 50-50 aspect. I know we've said that a lot. You can maybe diminish it and make it more towards genetics and not the outside exposure so you can help these people.
So do you think we'll ever get to a point where we're predicting that certain people will be criminals?
I feel like we would if it does go down and we do look more into the genetic side of it, then we can tell like, oh, this person has a deficient gene and we need to like try to help them early on and we can catch this. So we can stop it and that will probably get the crime rate low. It also help like psychiatrists know like how to help these people more out if they can just focus on their genetics and not their genetics and how they were raised, and if they were bullied, it would just be more prepared, like what's in them.
So I guess what I hear you guys saying is that it helps us understand the human condition. That is a good reason to study this. Can you talk to us about what the Bible says about nature and nurture? Does it comment or have anything to say about the subject?
So for the sinful nature and free will, the Bible, the main issue is that we all descend from one person who has sinned, and that's actually two people, and that's Adam and Eve. And we can't help it because the human condition is slowly getting worse and worse because of that. Because in the Bible, people have lived for 200, 300 years, like Abraham and Moses, and we're slowly, like we start dying by 50, 60, 70, 80. Like the human condition is slowly getting worse, and so there might be more genetic issues and more people who hurt people in more ways than we have now to affect the people negatively. So the Bible, I would say, just talks about how we're slowly getting worse, and there's only one way to go to help it.
That was like what I was gonna basically say about it.
Do you have any specific verses or references or anything that comments specifically about the human condition and the depths of our sinfulness?
I did not look up the verses.
So I have an identical twin. I'm a crook, and he's a really good guy. So if it's 50-50, how did that happen? We have the same genetics, we had the same environment all through high school and college. Why did I turn out so bad and he turned out so good?
Oh, for like one of our twins, we did, the theory is if a particular trait is genetic, the identical twins would be more alike than the fraternal twins. So like we did basic stuff like fraternal twins and other ones. So like the results were that they were more alike and identical twins were far more similar than the fraternal twins on that kind of aspect.
Also, with an identical twin, to be more specific with that question, are you saying you guys had the exact same friends, played the exact same sports, and your parents treated you the exact same way?
Right on.
That is very unlikely. And that's it. Yeah, it's very unlikely.
So, but how would you explain it? I mean, obviously I'm not a criminal. He is a good guy. I'm a fairly good guy.
Oh, you really have a twin?
I really do have a
I thought it was a theory. Wow.
Really.
There's another Coach
So,
Galloway.
If there was to do, if I was to go astray, what would be the cause of that? Because we have the same genetics, we've had the same environment pretty much. How would you explain that?
It's just who you surround yourself with. Like what everyone tells us in high school, that whoever you hang out with, that's who you're going to be. And if you hang out with bad people, then you're going to eventually go and say that's the normal, and I want to try to be in with that crowd. If you're hanging out with good people, saying that is the normal and I need to be good in society.
It also doesn't have to be people, it could be social media and the news that can affect you. Because I know we're not talking about school shootings in general, but if you relate to school shootings, ever since the main ones like Sandy Hook and Columbine, people go out and just shoot people for fame and fortune. Like they don't get fortune from it, but they get remembered.
like your all's answers. I mean, I think you're hitting in the right direction, Abby. That's kind of what Mr. Small's alluding to, is it really comes down to the free will part of things. And who I surround myself with, or who Kevin surrounds himself with, or what environmental factors, if it's social media, like you're talking about, Hannah, what we're feeding ourselves. So we have a free will to do that. So we really do. We can put all the blame, like the media seems like they want to put the blame on their family or other people, or their teachers should have picked this up, or their friends should have picked this up. But really it comes down to that person has a free will. They need to be held accountable, correct?
Yes.
You guys sort of talked about school shootings, and I think this is interesting because this is really poignant to your generation, something that you're very, very familiar with. And more of my generation, I'm thinking, you know, the Ted Bundys, the Ted Kaczynskis, John Wayne Gacy that you mentioned, the Menendez brothers, those sorts of things. Kind of that classic serial killer, or maybe not even a serial killer, but a kind of a shock killer situation. And really you're dealing more with these school shootings, mass shootings, those sorts of things. Talk to me about what you see as the similarity and the differences in a lot of the players in those that you've done the research on. So you've got, you know, Ted Bundy over here, but you've got, was it Dylan Klebold, and I can't remember the other guy's name from Columbine. I'm sorry, Eric something. Yeah, anyway. Talk to me, is there a difference there? Are we talking about nature, nurture? Is there more nature, more nurture on one of those sides? Is there different environmental influences? Certainly we mentioned social media earlier. What's going on between those two sets? Or are they all lumped together? Should we just say, hey, they all kind of fit in the same category?
You know, I would say they kind of like fit in the same category, but like again, some of those like killers, they were raised, and the shooters, they were bullied and raised differently. So they would try to take their anger, basically, like that's probably how they first started. Like they want to take their anger out on kids, and that's pretty like terrible in a way because they have like their own self-defense and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, just how the shooters were raised kind of almost like the same as like the killers, like not to say like they were raised exactly alike.
So similar upbringings, maybe.
Mhm.
Hannah, you agree with that?
I have a different opinion.
Okay.
I've noticed the older, like the killers from your time,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's mainly nurture.
You just call me old, Hannah?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
No. I meant like,
Just checking. I just want to make sure I was
let's
clear.
say 70s, 80s, 60s, 40s.
Oh, that hurt a little bit. Okay.
Well, I have Ed Gein on here too.
Carry forward.
I'm sorry.
Good.
Uh,
Okay, so those serial
That's
killers.
nurture.
Yeah.
Those are mainly nurture because the finances weren't as good, there was drugs, there was war. And then when you go to nowadays with the school shootings, let me see, I have it right here. Nicholas Cruz? No, not Nicholas Cruz. Let's see. Eric Harris, it's more genetic. Eric Harris, he was a narcissist and he had sadistic traits, so that's all genetic. Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, he had Asperger's. When it wasn't treated correctly. And then here, yeah. James Holmes, the Dark Knight movie theater shooter, he had anxiety and severe depression, which is also genetic. And he had problems at work. He had issues with, they kicked him out of school, I'm pretty sure, and he wanted to be remembered, and he let all that anger loose.
Okay.
So I would say the newer killers, it's genetic, because I don't want to say breeding, but like we're from the Bible times, we're slowly getting more corrupt with our genetics, and more towards the 80s and beyond that, like to the 40s and 30s, it's more nurtured from the
So
surroundings.
you mentioned narcissism earlier, and let's talk a little bit about the serial killers from my olden times. I can see a lot of narcissism at play in a lot of those actors. Do you see that same factor playing out in the school shooters? Do we see a lot of narcissism in that group?
I would say there's a little bit.
Okay.
It's different for each person. Because Adam Lanza, he had Asperger's.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily correlate narcissism with that. But it just depends on the type of person. Like narcissists, they think they deserve everything. And so when they shot up those schools or shot up the movie theater, they wanted they wanted to be remembered.
Tell me a little bit about the Columbine killers. Do you know anything about what they were doing before the shooting?
Wasn't like the Colin, so I can like remember.
Mhm.
Weren't those the two like the two guys? One was like on top of the roof. Was that the one? Or am
I
thinking
don't
of,
remember
like,
them being on top of the
another
roof,
one?
but there was two guys. They were both students. I'm just trying to think of, I remember seeing a lot of news footage after the fact, obviously, about them and some of the ways that they identified what should have been some telltale warning signs with those guys. Now you may go look at social media posts or those sorts of things, but with them it was a little bit different.
So can you repeat the question again?
I just wanted to know what they found out about those two guys. In particular, with the narcissism aspect that we were talking about, with those two killers in the Columbine shooting, what they found out after the fact. And you may not have it in your notes, and that's okay.
Oh well, she just told me. There's Eric Harris.
Mhm.
So he was like the dominant one in the
Okay.
shooting, and he endured like abusive behavior from several students. Eric does not seem to have been one of them, and bullies graduated the year before Eric.
Mhm.
And then Dylan, he was in the program for gifted students at his elementary school, and he was described as a shy child who loved baseball. And there was a lot of rage under the surface, like, as well. But since Eric was like the dominant, he was like, hey, we both have like the same like rage to like the kids at this school, like we need to do like something about it.
So he might have encouraged
Mhm.
him into coming along with. Okay, I was thinking about it particularly. There was a lot of videos that they showed of them before, and they were dressed up in the trench coats, and they had their guns, and they were talking like they were action heroes, and they're shooting things, and kind of showing off. There's a lot of bravado, I think you would say.
Yeah, I remember like a yearbook picture,
Mhm.
they had like pointing guns
Yeah.
at it.
It's almost like they were gearing themselves up for something. Let's switch gears just a little bit. Kind of coming off the narcissism thing, and narcissism by definition, I think, is kind of a love of oneself, a self-love, and almost unnatural promotion of oneself, we would say. So if we take that as the case, I looked that up really quickly. Don't think I knew that off the top of my head. But tell me a little bit about how those two groups, again, that we talked about earlier, play against each other with narcissism. And so you've got these serial killers over here of my olden day, and then you've got the school shooters of more modern times. I'm thinking about the outcomes after the crime for both of those groups of people. How did that usually play out? And how could narcissism have played a part in that? What ultimately happened to the people in this group? What ultimately happened to the people in this group? For the most part, and it's a generalization, but they tend to end about the same way.
Right. So the people, like the school shooters nowadays, the
Yes.
narcissistic ones, they do have anxiety and depression, and they usually ended up shooting themselves because going out with a bang leaves you popular. And that's their idea of going out with a bang,
Okay.
literally and figuratively. The older ones, they ended up in jail because they planned it out. These are more like, the school shooters were more like, they may have pumped themselves up, but they're new ideas and they don't plan it out. They're just like, hey, we're gonna go here and do all this. Serial killers from the 80s and stuff, they planned it out. Ted Bundy, he planned it out. Gacy planned it out. Ed Gein, he planned his out, even though his killings aren't exactly proven.
So, not everybody who comes from a difficult background, or not everyone who's bullied, or not everyone who's had a challenging upbringing turns out to be a criminal, engages in criminal behavior. Did any of your researchers look at from the other side? Let's see what helps make someone who has some of these same environmental factors in their background avoid a life of crime in the future.
Well, that would also go into the play of like psychiatrists and therapists. If they can like catch those kids on like with the bullying and all that, then they can like have someone to talk to if they do have those abusive homes, or if they don't have one, they would have still like someone like safe to talk to. And I know like one of my friends, she's been bullied, and she's talked to me because she trusts me more than a psychiatrist or a therapist. You just gotta find like that one person that you can like really talk to and share, and that could help and like change you for the better.
Does that mean everybody needs therapy?
It doesn't mean like everybody needs therapy. Like if you can at least like try it to see, because probably like maybe a doctor or someone that could help you more than a friend could, but a friend, they can like help you more, I would guess, because you're telling all your secrets and you're telling all your feelings to some stranger rather than like your friend, and you could possibly like save their life for that if you're talking to your friend.
Abby, being a person of faith, and assuming that your friend knows that you're a person of faith, how does that make that easier or harder to have those conversations?
It's kind of hard because she has told me that she has a difficult time and she sometimes doesn't want to wake up the next day, and it's like hard too because I'm trying to use a lot of biblical references and all that because she needs to know like God like loves her and all that, and I also use my personal like friendship with her and saying we have a great friendship and I don't know like what I would do without you, and you can just still like pour all your information in at me, and I could at least help you, and that has helped her a lot. But I do use religion also, like you were here for a purpose, because she doesn't think that she's here for a purpose.
I would encourage you that what you're doing is the definition of friendship. Proud of you.
Ms. Ingram, can I go back to your question from before?
Sure.
That also is when genetics takes place because people can handle things differently. There is a difference between identical and fraternal twins, so the genetic makeup would be different. So let's say me and my sister Jessica Mitchell, she came to school here and everything. She is a little bit more social than me, and let's say when she was bullied, she had my mom to talk to. When I was bullied in 4th grade, it was 4th grade, I didn't know what to do, so I became a little more antisocial, and I don't trust people as easily. It's just how your genetics take place.
Well, I have two other kind of follow-up, one's a follow-up and others is a different train of thought, that just based on what you said, when you said antisocial, those are phrases that are generally, you look at it, you look at antisocial behavior. What is it about antisocial behavior that leads to criminal behavior? And I say that as someone who's an introvert who has difficulty with, normal interpersonal relationships. How do you distinguish between somebody who's just a little socially awkward and somebody who's going to take a deviant antisocial behavior and end up in crime?
I would say there are stages. So for me, I'm very quiet in school, but outside of school, I am the most hyper person ever, and I talk to everyone, and I'm jumping around. There's places that make you feel comfortable, but when you go to the next stage, to more deviant behavior, it's when the person can actually seem completely normal. Like, normal is not normal. That's something to be aware of. And if, let's say, they board themselves up in their house, or they live secluded in the woods, like Ed Gein in the 30s, it's just those kinds of things.
Okay. Thoreau didn't go out and kill anybody, though, to my knowledge. He went out with some goods, too. Sorry.
Well, I was just like going back to like the 30s.
Right, yeah.
But you don't have to live in the woods. Usually it's the most normal people who have a family and kids so they can fit in, but that's more the methodical people with psychopathy who think what's the way to be most normal, and they'll force themselves to be social even though it makes them very uncomfortable, and they'll fake the emotions to get what they want.
The other question I wanted to ask is we spent a lot of time talking about psychiatry, psychology, the sort of the mental aspect to it. That with nature and biology, is there something, what specifically is it about our biology, our biological makeup that would lend toward one kind of behavior or another? I mean, did you do any studies on like what's in the brain or what could affect behavior?
So we have specific chemical balances in our brain, and they're different for each person, and one can trigger at a specific time, the right time, the wrong time, and that'll affect the outcome Also,